I'd like to call the statutory public meeting to order, a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act. The public meeting is being held pursuant to the provisions of Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, CP 13 as amended, respecting zoning bylaw amendment for 1426 Cottameyer Road. Up first is the applicant presentation, official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. Rachel LaRock, Senior Associate of the Biglieri Group. And I'll call on Rachel for the presentation on behalf of the applicant. The podium's yours. I don't know if the mic's on. You might have.
Hit the button that says push. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you said, my name is Rochelle LaRock. I'm a senior associate with the Biglieri Group. I'm here to represent 100069876 Ontario Inc. for their application for official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment. There's also a application for draft plan of vacant land condominium that's associated with these applications. However, it's not subject to a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act. If I could have the next slide. So as you identified, the property is located at 1426 Cottameyer Road. It's located north of Port Robinson Road on the east side of Cottameyer Road. It's currently developed with one single detached dwelling. Next slide. So the lands are currently within the Port Robinson West secondary plan area and are identified as being a residential in the residential area. They're further designated as being low density residential in the designations. The low-density residential designation permits single detached dwellings with a density of 12 to 30 units per hectare and semi-detached dwellings with a density range of 20 to 40 units per net hectare. Townhouse dwellings are permitted, but they're required to have a maximum of 15% of the total number of units within the subdivision. The lands are currently zoned residential development, or RD, in the zoning bylaw 214097 and future development FD in zoning bylaw 60-2019. Both of those zoning bylaws are listed as the residential provisions in zoning bylaw 60-2019 are currently under appeal. Next slide, please. So as identified, the zoning, an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment have been applied for to allow for the future development of the property with 28 to 30 townhouse condominium units. The total number of units is in the range of 28 to 30 units, and that's just a range because we're still having conversations with city staff as well as with the developer with land surrounding to determine what the access point to the development will be, whether it'll be to the future subdivision road to the south or directly onto Cottameyer Road, which will impact the total number of units. Next slide, please. So option one is the 28 development unit, which has access directly to Cottameyer, and then on the right is option two with 30 townhouse units, which would connect to that future subdivision road. Next slide, please. So the proposed official plan amendment is to policy B19621, which would allow 100% of the development to be townhouse dwellings, whereas this policy only permits a maximum of 15% of the total subdivision to be composed of townhouse dwellings. The proposed density is, at this point, 39.16 units per net hectare, which is consistent with the maximum density in the low density residential designation of the Port Robinson West secondary plan area. Next slide. So as there are two zoning bylaws with respect to residential provisions in place at this time, both need to be amended. So the amendment would be to the RD and the FD zones. And so it would amend those applicable sections. Both the RD and the FD zones are really meant to be interim zones, recognizing that these lands would be developed in the future and would require specific private initiated applications to come forward. So our request is to rezone the lands to site-specific third density residential R3 zone in 214097 zoning bylaw, and site-specific private street development R3D in bylaw 60/2019. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go over each of these individually. There are 2 slides worth of amendments. However, it might appear that there are a number of amendments to bylaw 60/2019 as well as the other bylaw. However, all of these are being put in place to provide clarity to allow for the development to move forward. Many of these requested amendments are to recognize that there are covered rear decks which aren't contemplated in the zoning bylaws, which then require a setback to this. The other reasoning for these amendments is to recognize that the type of condominium that's being developed provides each unit with a small portion of green space that would be owned, as well as common element area around it. So it might seem that it's smaller lot areas and perhaps not as much green space. However, it's to really recognize that some of that yard will be owned by the individual units, whereas the remainder will be in a common element and maintained in the condominium ownership. So next slide, please. So again, these are additional amendments, and so these are the amendments to 2140. Once again, very similar, but really just to provide clarity and to allow for ease of implementation when we get to building permit, to see these in the ground so that there aren't questions from staff and we can build the product that we have proposed. And so next slide, that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'm happy to provide answers. And in the background was the proposed elevations of the development. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rochelle, and I'll open the floor for questions. Go ahead, Councillor D'Angelo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If the presenter, can you just put up the diagram showing the 2 different options that you're looking at? Because in our report here, or in the public meeting report, it only had the one diagram showing the Kottmeyer entrance as opposed to the side street entrance. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a few questions that I'd like to see addressed. Is there going to be any sidewalks in the condominium in either proposal?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at this point, there have not been any sidewalks proposed. However, that's something that we can look at.
Okay, I think it's important to do so. The second one is, from the diagram, it's hard to tell. Are you looking at parking, through you, Mr. Mayor, are you looking at parking 2 vehicles, like one in the garage and one on the driveway? Is that the anticipated parking spots for the units?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct, that there would be 1 parking space in the garage, 1 parking space in the driveway, as well as visitor parking being provided at the hammerhead at the end.
Yeah, when I look at it, so is there 4, like, it's hard to tell from the diagram. It looks like there's either 6 spots in a little island, or is that 8 spots?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, on the option 1, there would be 8 spots total, 4 on either side. And on the option 2, because that area hasn't changed, it would be the same. So 8 visitor parking spaces total.
Okay, so 8 visitor, okay. Will there be any through you, Mr. Mayor, again, another question regarding parking. Will there be any anticipated parking in front of the units on the road? Or will they be restricted to the visitor spots or to the unit slots?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there wouldn't be any parking permitted on the road because it would be identified as a fire route because it meets that minimum standard of 6 meters. So any additional parking would have to be in the visitor parking spaces.
Okay, thank you. And then just along that, in the wintertime, there's snow accumulation. Is there a snow removal plan, or how will you handle that through the proposed development?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would have to go back to the client to confirm, but my expectation is that there would be either snow storage areas beside the visitor parking spaces, as well as a plan to have any snow in excess of that area removed from the site by a private company.
Okay, that's, Mr. Mayor, that's something that it could be noted. I'd like to see some sort of plan when it comes back as a report, because, you know, there's no other place to dump snow there because it's gonna either go on city property or on someone else's property. So I'd just like to see that addressed.
That's duly noted. Anyone else with questions? Go ahead, Councillor. Oh, are you done, Councillor Dean?
No, that was it for now. I may have another 1 or 2, but the bulk of my questions revolved around parking and snow removal and sidewalks. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you for that presentation. I'm looking at the City of Thorold official plan, and particularly Port Robinson West secondary plan. And there's a couple of points in there that I find very critical that aren't being addressed here. So I want to talk about them if I may. First off, one of the objectives, B193, is that it's pedestrian oriented. And so I'm going to stress the same point that Councillor D'Angelo mentioned about sidewalks. If we're trying to encourage pedestrians friendly neighborhoods, then we should have places for them to walk safely, especially if this is going to be a private road. We have to make sure that people out walking their dogs or going out to visit another neighbor are safe when they're walking about. So that's something that we really need to see, something very critical. Also, under residential B1933, it states that residential areas will provide a minimum of 25% of new residential development within the Port Robinson West secondary plan that meets the provincial definition of affordable housing. Have you addressed this at all, or has the developer addressed this?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've not addressed it in this specific development. However, it would be a conversation with the city planning department to see how, as overall Port Robinson West secondary plan area, that affordable housing target has been achieved or will be achieved.
Yeah, I think through you, Mr. Mayor, it's just something that needs to be addressed all the time as development in Thorold is moving forward. This is something that has to be front and center to make sure that we're making adequate housing possibilities for everyone. So there are some key points right in the official plan that talk about that. I hope that your developer will take a look at some of those things. Also, in our official plan, it talks about our distinctive neighborhood character, and the first point that it says is that ensure that the majority of all residences are within a maximum 5-minute walk to a park, a public park. So somehow we need to address this as well. If we're trying to make neighborhoods that are vibrant, we need to provide them with places where they can also visit, enjoy, and use. So that's something I'd like to see as well. And of course, this is out in the Greenfields area. what is the developer planning to protect some of the sensitive areas and habitat all around there? What sort of buffers are being planned so that this development doesn't just spill over onto some of the areas that are possibly used for farming?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so there aren't any natural heritage features on the site that would require any buffering or any sort of removal of features. There is nothing environmentally significant on it, so the entire property can be developed. The lands immediately to the east are currently being used, and the future use is a stormwater management pond. With respect to any development spilling onto any of the neighboring properties, when this property is developed, they will only be allowed to move soil, develop, do any sort of site works on the property that they own. They won't be able to extend beyond their boundaries for grading or for servicing. Any sort of those works would not be permitted because it's subject to this site only.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, through you, Mr. Mayor, is again, as Councillor D'Angelo pointed out, the parking. And I tried to also ascertain from the drawing that you put up whether or not that parking was just visibly present at the end of the street. Is that how it would be? So along the back side would be the parking spots. Is there anything going to be put into place that makes it a little bit less visible, and perhaps we should be thinking of tree coverage or maybe some sort of wall of some sort so that we don't drive in and see a row of parked cars?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe when you would drive in, you would see the houses. Because of how the parking is situated,
Okay.
it wouldn't be a bank of cars that you would see at the end. You would see the houses and then that island. Anything to do with detailed landscaping and design plans would come through the detailed design process that's part of the condominium approval.
Good. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And go ahead, Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to the presenter. My fellow councillors have asked most of my questions, but I do have one, and you went through it kind of quick on the slides. It had to do with lot coverage or minimum lot size. Are you asking for an amendment to the minimum lot size?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we are requesting a reduction to the minimum lot area. But perhaps if the clerk could pull up the slide with the two. And I recognize that it's difficult to see. So in a typical lot in a subdivision, you would own all the way back to the perimeter of this block. In this condominium development, they own a portion around their property, including up to the 3-meter deck at the rear of the property or at the rear of their house. And then their ownership ends. But then behind that is an area of common ownership that would be maintained by the condominium corporation, and it would be able to be used by all the residents. So the reduction in the overall lot size is a function that they're not owning all the way back to that perimeter. They're owning, for lack of a better term, a floating island of land surrounded by common element features, which includes green space.
Thanks for that answer. That clarifies that. So visually, they will not look smaller. It's just the legal description, I guess.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. That it's the legal description and the legal ownership that creates this smaller lot size.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the final, comment question to you is, I think it's imperative there's sidewalks in this subdivision or this vacant land condominium. So I think that's something maybe planning staff and your developer can look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. I see Councillor Sentence, did you have anything? Then Councillor D'Angelo, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through to you, to the presenter. Thanks for answering the questions. The one that just came to mind through further discussion is on Cotmire Road. You mentioned there's going to be the common area past the floating deck. Will that be fenced in or landscaped in a manner that individuals won't be running directly onto the road?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's something that'll come out of the detailed design, but of course, for any future owners, we would want to make sure that they still have privacy. So whether it be fencing, enhanced landscaping, to make sure that they can still enjoy their backyard. So that's something that would come out in more detail through the next stage of the condominium development.
Okay, no, I appreciate that answer, Mr. Mayor, and that's an opportunity to do some landscaping where Councillor O'Hare mentioned about trees and putting some vegetation in there that enhances the look of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor O'Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Just one final question, if I may. And I'd just like to ask, these 28 to 30 units or condos that you're proposing, townhouses, are they all going to be the same size? And what is that approximate square footage? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they will all be the same size. I want to say it's around 2,100 square feet, but I may be mistaken, so please don't hold me to it. They will all be two stories, I can tell you that.
Okay, thank you very much. That's exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions before we move on? Go ahead, Councillor Longo.
Yeah, sorry, something just popped in my mind, through you to the presenter. The official plan allows 15% townhouses, but you're asking for 100%. What's the reason for that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a smaller lot. So part of the reason that it's a condominium development is because it's a smaller parcel of land. To meet the minimum density of 50 units and jobs per hectare, because this is a greenfield area, to maximize the number of units that we can fit, townhouses were the best option. They're something that can be marketed. They provide, I don't want to say an interim, but a middle step in home ownership. Somewhat, well, maybe not somewhat, more affordable than a single, more affordable than a semi-detached. They provide an entryway to get into home ownership, so it's just providing a different form of housing. And because of the small size of the lot, doing, say, a mix of towns and semis and singles, it just doesn't work as well and just doesn't function as easily.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Rochelle, and for your presentation. And we'll move on now to our next registered speakers. I have Stephen and Stephanie Fisher from E-Prime Construction. I'll call on Stephen and Stephanie Fisher as registered speakers to the application. Please provide your full names and addresses for the public record. Please note you have 5 minutes to address the members of council and the public. Go ahead. Are they on by Zoom? Okay. Hi, Stephen.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. We have really nothing to add other than what has been presented by Rochelle. We hope you'll support the development. We're looking forward to moving it forward and working with our neighbor to the south and east to make this happen for the city of Thorold and for ourselves.
Thank you very much. And so is there any questions for Stephen? Seeing none, thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you.
At this time, is there anyone else online or present in the chamber who wishes to speak to this application? Sydney, I'll read it one more time then. At this time, is there anyone else online or present in the chamber who wishes to speak to this application? And I've been informed that there is no one. Planning report. DS 21-2023 proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, D0902-2022 and D1408-2022, 1426 Cottameyer Road. Report DS 21-2023 is only presented to council and the public for information purposes. It is currently open for questions and comment from members of City Council. Please note all comments will be captured by City staff and incorporated into the final report, which will be brought forward to a future council meeting for consideration. Can I get a mover and seconder for that report? I got Councillor O'Hare and Councillor Sentence. Are there any questions at this time? I know we highlighted some points that were raised during the questions regarding sidewalks, snow removal, and
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and affordable. If that could be addressed.
as well as all the other issues that are raised, and they've been captured, correct, Sydney? That is correct. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Adjournment of the public meeting. This fulfills the requirements of the Planning Act, RSO 1990 CP 13, pursuant to Section 34. The recommendation report for this application will be brought forward at a future meeting of council. The public meeting portion of this application is now closed.